leech pattern this week. This is called the electric leech. I did some research on this fly a number of years ago when I first ran across it for a fly tying class focused on leech patterns, and I didn't find a whole lot of history on this in terms of who came up with it initially. Maybe I was, didn't do that deep of a search or something, but it is a pattern that's out there and it seems to be popular in terms of leech patterns these days. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to do. It's a rabbit zonker style leech pattern. Has a little bit of flash to it, and if you do search around, you'll see that this is tied in a number of different color patterns and styles to it. I'm tying this in just a all black pattern, except for the flash in this. It's a little bit more weighted with a bead and some lead wraps on it, so this will get down to the bottom and easily stay there if you do some mends to keep it down on the bottom. But it's an interesting pattern to tie, so I just thought it would be kind of interesting as I'm doing just a few leech patterns to include it. That's the electric leech, and I'll go ahead and get started. Start the electric leech by placing our hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 9672 in a size 6. And I have to put a bead on the front of this, and you don't have to do this on all hooks, but sometimes, depending on the size of the bead and the hook, it's beneficial to go ahead and debarb the hook. I like to debarb my hooks anyway. I'm going to place a black bead. This is a black tungsten bead. This is a 7/32 bead on this size 6 hook. Get my hook in the vise. Now I'm going to add some weight. I'm just going to put about a dozen wraps. This is a 0.020 lead wire, and this is going to add a little bit of weight to it just to help get it down to the bottom a little bit more. And it's also going to help in the motion of this in the water so that it takes on a little bit more of a jigging action going up and down as opposed to just swinging when you're fishing this. I get about a dozen wraps on there. You could use a heavier wire if you want. Smooth that off, and then I'm going to push all those wraps right up into that bead to fill that in. There we go. For thread, I'm going to start with a black. This is a FlyMasters Plus by Danville in black. This is a thicker thread, and that's simply because I have to cover up some of the thread wraps, some of the hook shank, as well as the wraps of lead. And I got to move back and forth a little bit here. I'm going to switch to a smaller diameter when it comes to actually finishing out the fly. I'm going to attach my thread just behind the wraps of lead and get that anchored, and then wrap all down on the lead just to hold it in place, and then put in a little bit of a thread dam to give myself a nice transition. The body of this is going to be made up of sparkle braid, and this is a Wapsi sparkle braid in black. It just comes on a card like this, kind of like your other chenilles and things. We're going to tie that in just in front of the hook a little bit. I'll wrap that down here in just a second. And then I have a rib of black wire. This is a medium UTC black wire. I will also anchor that in on my side of the hook and then wrap all of this down to the end of the shank. Body's actually very, very simple. There's not much to it in terms of it's not real fat and bulky. And then you just want to smooth this off a little bit so that sparkle braid doesn't have any bulges or anything in it. I'm going to bring my thread right up to almost right behind the bead, just a little bit, maybe half an eye right behind the bead. Take our sparkle braid, start to wrap that body in. Each wrap just goes in front of the other. Again, we're not trying to bulk this up or anything. We're just covering that up so the body itself has just a little bit of flash to it. Once I get up to my thread, I'll anchor the sparkle braid in. And trim away the excess. Now the wing on the electric leech is made from rabbit zonker. This is actually a half skin of rabbit zonker in black. You can either make your own or you can get packages of them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tie the wing in. I'm going to anchor it right here behind the bead. There's a couple of different ways you can actually tie the wing in on this. I find that this is the most economical because it's very easy to end up with extra little snippets of rabbit zonker. By tying it in right here behind the bead, I can then separate the hairs and use the wire to lash it down to the actual shank, kind of like a matuka fly. I like to moisten the hair. You can have a little dish of water nearby if needed, but I'll often just wet my fingers. Want to try and take a little care in making certain you're getting all of the hair separated such that the wire is going to go just right in between the hair and not actually trap any down. I don't think it's a huge deal in terms of this fly because in the water as this swims around, all this hair is flowing around and everything, but in terms of tying, it just looks a little bit nicer. So take your time at this step. The other thing is when you're bringing this wire around, each time you're bringing around, be careful that you're not curling up. You can see it a little bit here, the hide for that zonker kind of gets compressed and curled up. You want to try and keep it so that it's actually wrapping down and around. And you just want to take a little bit of care with that. Again, I don't think it's a deal breaker in terms of the fly. I think it will still fish and work just fine. Now, at this stage, the one thing you want to be careful of mostly is keeping tension on the wire, because that's what's going to keep all of your body here and everything secured in. If in the process of wrapping this in, you lose tension on that wire, then you're going to have to go back and almost to the first wrap of wire to start over again. Now I'm just going to advance forward, coming up about 1/8 of an inch. That would be about 3 or 4 millimeters up the body each time, stroking the hair back and separating it, bringing the wire right across the top, pulling that tight. And then we just keep working our way all the way up the zonker to the bead. Once you get up to your thread, right at the beginning of the zonker here and the bead, we'll just go ahead and wrap that in. 3 or 4 nice wraps to secure it. And then we can just twist that wire off. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and change to my smaller thread. I'm just going to put in a 3 or 4 turn whip finish real quick with the black thread. I also like to, at this point, put in some head cement right here to soak down into the thread wraps and into that hide, just to secure all of that down inside there. So we're going to put some flash on the sides of this and a little ice dub for a collar to cover it up, and our fly is done. Thing is, this Zonker strip is a little long. Obviously, you can't see all of it going to the end of the vise here. I want this hide section here to be about the same length as the body here. I don't want to cut this straight through like this, because then I'll actually cut the hair across and I end up with a cut tail. I want it to taper and be smoother. So what I have to do is actually cut the hide. In order to measure it, it's actually fairly easy. You can just fold the hide over the actual fly, and you can see right behind the bead that right here is where I need to cut that hide. Now I can either use straight razor like this. I could also potentially use the inside edge of my scissors. Just remember, you don't want to cut through the whole hide and hair, because then you'll have an abrupt cut on there, and what you're really looking for is more of a taper. So you just cut the hide, gently cut the hide, and you end up with, see, a nice tapered tail down here as opposed to abrupt cut. We're going to add a little bit of flash to the electric leech, and I'm just going to throw in some purple Flashabou and some red holographic Flashabou. Very, very sparse in the flash department, so I'm going to just cut 1 strand of purple, and I'm going to match that up with 1 strand of red. The tips don't have to be perfectly even. About the middle section of those 2 strands, I have to reattach my other thread first. So I will reattach my smaller diameter thread here, have it back towards the collar area right here, because I'll take my 2 strands of Flashabou, bring them up under the thread and over to my side. This gives a wrap of thread over them to act as kind of a third hand to hold them in place. Then I will pull them to the right here, getting the 2 ends here just a little bit, maybe 1/4 of an inch or so past the end of the tail, just a little bit on the end there. Then I'll wrap forward a couple of wraps, take those 2 strands to the other side, and then wrap backwards to bind them in along the outside. This will then give me these 2 strands on both sides. I can match those together, cut them about the same length. We'll leave you with a long enough couple of strands if you want to put those aside, and then you can tie them on both sides when you get enough of those. But that's a little bit quicker and easier way to tie them in. Plus, I think the Flashabou is a little more secure. For the collar on this, and this is mostly just to cover up the thread wraps right here from tying in the Zonker, as well as finishing it, and the Flashabou, I'm going to use some ice dub. This is just some Hairlines UV black ice dub. Doesn't have to be super thick. We're mostly just wanting to cover up that area. So I'm going to just make a dubbing noodle of a couple inches long. That's about it. Starting backwards, I'll wrap forward just enough to cover all of that. Give this just a little bit of a collar. And then I'll put a 4 or 5 turn whip finish right behind the bead. You can trim some of the fibers that are sticking out if you want. I don't think it's really that big of a deal. You're going to get more as this fly is in the water and fished. It's going to start kind of spreading out a little bit and getting a little bushy. That's fine. Some head cement right behind the bead. Feel free to put a generous amount down in there. This is a fly-tight head cement, which is a thinner head cement. I like it because it will actually soak down into the bead and all the materials there, just to secure that a little bit better. That is the electric leech. You can do this in many different patterns, as I've mentioned. If you search around on the internet for the electric leech, you'll see it in a pearl. I've seen it in an olive color. Your browns, your olives, things like that are some of your more popular colors. Change up some of the Flashabou if you want. It's a fun, interesting pattern. So there's the electric leech. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.